All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us going. I saw there were 5 RSVPs on the GoTo training site, but that's not always an accurate representation of who's actually able to make it. So if anybody else joins us as we go, that's okay. Just a little bit about my GoTo attendance policy. It's a little different. Are either of you guys on-campus students?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Is this your first online class, or have you done any before?
No. No, I've done some.
English comp was online.
Okay, so you have a little bit of background on how all this works. I'm never quite sure if my campus students have done this before, but okay, so you know, mute your microphones and all that. As far as attendance, and I'm not sure how other instructors do that. I don't take attendance for GoTo sessions. My feeling is that it's to your benefit to attend if you can, and if not, the archive will be available to watch when you're able to. And I definitely recommend watching the GoTo archives if you're not able to attend live, because there will be information that's beneficial to the assignments. And typically, those who do not either attend live or watch the archives, it's usually reflected in the performance on the activities, so it kind of comes out in the wash as far as participation. So that's the way I handle that. I get questions occasionally, how to show attendance and so forth. But the go-tos are about an hour long. Typically, I think week 2 usually goes a little bit longer than that because there's a lot of material to cover. And since we're usually small groups, you're welcome to stay on the mic or get on the microphone at any point and ask questions or make comments. Otherwise, it's just going to be me talking for an hour. Okay. Did you guys have any questions or anything that I could address really quick before getting into what this class is all about?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay, great. Well, if anything comes to mind as we go, don't hesitate to let me know. And since you guys are both campus students, if you see me in the Friday blend at all and you have any questions.
I thought I recognized your voice.
What's that?
I thought I recognized your voice.
Yeah. I'm sort of the phantom of the MCBS program. Since I only teach online, nobody really knows who I am lurking in the back there. But that's me. And if you have any questions at that point or anything you want to talk about, you can grab me during those meeting times too. Oh, speaking of Friday Blend, since you're in online class this month, you're actually not required to attend Friday Blend, but we recommend that you keep going if you're able to, just so you keep in the loop and stay current with what's going on. So that's another thing. Sorry?
Which group would we go to?
You would go to the design group, which is
okay.
Pete Episcopo and Libby and me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so aesthetics. What is aesthetics? And I'm actually going to ask this. What comes to mind when you hear that word, aesthetics?
Science.
What was that?
Science.
Science?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the way something looks.
Okay.
Like it has good aesthetics. It looks good, or it's pleasing to your eye, maybe.
Yeah, you hear that phrase, aesthetically pleasing, a lot.
Yeah.
And actually, in fact, there is a bit of a science to it as well. And what you'll see is the term is thrown around a lot very casually. You know, when you hear somebody say that's very aesthetically pleasing, or I really like the aesthetics, or even sometimes it's used to describe a particular style, like a Southwestern aesthetic or industrial aesthetic. But it's really kind of a very casual use of the term. It doesn't have a real solid meaning. But it actually comes from a branch of philosophy, which is which studied the appreciation and creation of beauty. So exploring what is considered beautiful and why things are considered beautiful. And was really focused on visual art. And two examples that I have on the board right now are two works of classic art. The one on the left is a Jackson Pollock painting, which is a more abstract modern art piece, and then the one on the right is by Claude Monet. And you can see drastically different. One, perhaps the one on the right maybe is more easily approachable and appreciable, whereas that one on the left is, some people might look at that and say, I think my 2-year-old could do that. So obviously there's a lot of subjective value and taste involved there. But as modern day media professionals, we really can't rely too heavily on that kind of subjective judgment. We need something that's really concrete that we can count on to guide our choices when we plan and create media. And that idea is what created the discipline of applied media aesthetics. I'm going to go back really quick to that last definition. Notice that the focus in traditional aesthetics is studying appreciation of beauty. Now the definition changes a bit. It's described as a process in which we examine a number of media elements, how they interact, and our perceptual reactions to them. So what do you see as the fundamental change between those two definitions?
Can I see the first one again?
Yeah. So this was the kind of the classic definition of aesthetics as it relates to art philosophy.
I think this one is more kind of appreciating, like it says, appreciating the beauty in everything, versus the other one where it's just kind of basing it off of your reaction that could be good or bad.
Yeah, you hit it right on the nose. When we talk about beauty, it's usually a very positive reaction. We find something very pleasant and pleasing to the eye. But when you open that up to perceptual reactions in the broad sense, it can be any kind of response. Maybe we want our audience to feel very happy and joyful about what they're seeing, but maybe it's more in line with our goals to make them feel very sympathetic or even sad. The example I always mention in this lecture is the SPCA commercials. I think it's SPCA with Sarah McLachlan singing "The Arms of the Angel" and all the sad puppies' faces. Their goal isn't to make you feel necessarily happy. They want you to feel sympathy and sadness for the situation that these poor animals are in, and because that's their goal in creating that piece of media. And it really depends on what discipline you're in. Of course, if you're a journalist, you want to be objective and not really influence the emotions of your audience. in a particular way, ideally. But if you're in advertising and marketing or PR, then that certainly becomes a factor. So what we're going to explore this month is some of these media elements and how they interact with one another, how you can combine imagery and words to create a story that is either tugging at their heartstrings or making somebody laugh, depending on what the goal is. And we'll look at how color plays an influence in that, both from an emotional standpoint as well as just perceptual, the kind of exciting energy it can add to an image. And then finally, we'll end with looking at composition, how you can decide where your audience focuses their attention first, as well as the use of typefaces. And I decided to incorporate typefaces because so much of what we do in MCBS is text-based or graphic-based. If we were filmmakers studying aesthetics, we'd get really into lighting and chiaroscuro and some of those factors that we really don't have a lot of control over, given the equipment and focus of our program. But so trying to make this relevant. And here's how I'm putting this all together. This is a crazy diagram, but this is a breakdown of the class. And if you look at it in vertical columns, week 1, week 2, and week 3, there's 3 assignments a week. You'll do the exploration, which usually has some video lessons or readings or a combination of those, along with an exercise that lets you investigate that material in a more hands-on manner. And then you'll do a Photoshop practice. And those are usually going to be on Thursdays. I realized I didn't adjust the dates for week 1 because last month we had a holiday, and so week 1 was a little skewed. But so you got an extra day this week. But typically they will be on Thursdays. And the Photoshop practice deals with the ideas from your exploration, but at the same time you're learning to use Photoshop. Have either of you ever used Photoshop to any extent?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I built this really with the absolute beginner in mind. So some of this might be old hat for you if you've worked with it before. And if that's the case, absolutely feel free to challenge yourself and go beyond what's asked for in the practice assignments, because I'm really starting at the basics, how to open a file, how to add text to an image, how to save out an image, basic cropping. And we'll be creating visual stories in week 1. And then in week 2, we get into color manipulation in Photoshop. So changing colors of specific items in a photograph or changing the color scheme as a whole. And then in week 3 is more extensive photo editing, like adding something, taking something from one image and putting it in another, taking stuff out of images. We especially focus on the compositing though, so combining 2 or more images together. And so while you're doing that, you'll also be continuing to explore color theory, visual hierarchy, and some of these topics while you're getting to know Photoshop. And every Sunday there's the mood board activity. They're called the Visual Mission Statement Project in FSO. And I'll explain what that is because it's a little more involved. But that's going to be an ongoing project. You're going to build a piece at a time each week. And then in week 4, everything works a little differently. Now all these pieces come together. The media that you've been planning in your mood board projects, you'll now create using the Photoshop skills that you've gained through the practices or that you already had, and apply all these concepts from the exploration. Hopefully that makes some sense. This diagram needs a little work, I think. All good so far?
Yeah.
Great. So the mood board project, which I used to actually call the mood board project, now I've changed it to the visual mission statement project. Have either of you ever worked with a mood board before or know what they are?
Just
Yes.
in Friday Blend last month.
Okay. Well, good. That'll be a good introduction then. Was that from were you guys in Magnetic Field Day?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I was really sad that I missed the outcome of that on Friday, too. Hope that went well.
Yeah, I did.
Great. Okay, so you're familiar with this. In fact, you saw this exact image.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of those listening on the archive that might not have been there, a really quick introduction to mood boards. They are a way of brainstorming and planning a project, specifically a visual media project. Originally started with interior designers, but then were picked up by graphic designers as well and other kinds of designers, including web design. And it allows you to just collect your ideas in one place before you really start production on a project. In this case, this is a graphic designer's mood board that I found online. This artist has collected a lot of different influences that is along the lines of what they want to do with their project. So these are pre-existing pieces of graphic art that are similar to what this artist has in mind for what they're doing now. They've also collected some typeface styles that they thought were appropriate, and they're starting to think about color palettes. And in fact, all of these things you will do this month. All three of these factors will be in your mood board. We're going to do it a little bit different, though. Instead of just one page with all this collected, we're going to do it piece by piece as we go through the material. What a mood board allows you to do, and I talked about this a little bit in Blend, is to share your idea, your vision, with whoever's involved in the project. If you're working on a team, you can share this with your graphic artists, with your programmers, videographers, or whoever might be involved, so they understand where you're going with it before they get started on their work. If you're working with a client, you can make sure that you're on the right track with them and are meeting their needs and their idea of what they are paying you to do. And you could also pitch it to project managers and so on, artistic directors, and what have you. So typically these will be things that are shareable. You can use a Keynote slide or anything like that, but then you would have to email it. If you use something online like Google Draw or even Google Slides, and there's a variety of other actual tools created specifically for this purpose that you can just send a link and they can open it up. That is even more favorable because it's so much easier to collaborate. For our purposes this month, we're going to use a Pages document. And the only reason I'm using a Pages document is so I can more easily structure the project and do it piece by piece and keep it all consistent. Down the road, when you get to web design, I think they use a mood board and they open it up to whatever you want to use. But you'll see this template in the assignments. And we go through creating the collage of images that, like we saw with that graphic artist, that's sort of along the lines of what you have in mind for your own project. you'll describe to me the idea that you have for this design. Week 2, you build a color palette. And this is actually the beginnings of your personal brand as well. When you start creating this palette, you can start thinking of your own personal brand as a media professional. If you were to create business cards or personal website and so forth. And selecting typeface styles. And again, that can play a part in your personal brand as well. When you get down to the graphic design course with Jacob Kaplan, he will refer back to this, and you'll have the opportunity to actually use some of this again if you choose to. And all that comes together in week 4. This was on the diagram I was showing you when you actually create the design that you've been working on. So what I haven't described yet is what this project is. What exactly are you building? We're going to be using Photoshop because that's just our design tool of the month. And the idea is that you're taking your personal mission statement that you wrote way back in Introduction to Media Communications, I think in the final week, which describes your personal goals and idea of success and your values as a person and as, in particular, as a media professional. The idea of this assignment is hypothetically, if you were to represent that mission statement in a visual way, what would that look like? That's what you're designing. I usually compare it to a movie poster, because if you think about a movie, you have that entire story. You're trying to compress that into one single poster, so a single image and a few words that expresses what that movie's all about. That's what we're going to do with your mission statement. You're going to find a way to represent that, the feeling, the values, the goals, and personality of that in a visual manner that an audience can look at and kind of get a sense of what you're all about. So in week 1, this has changed a little bit, the template. You're going to see it'll ask you for your actual mission statement. So I have an idea of what we're working with. And then you'll describe some of the visual themes you can see coming from that. Ideas that you want to communicate visually. A way that you can go about that is to look through your mission statement and pull out some of the keywords. And based on those keywords, you can start thinking of what the visual style would look like. Do you want it to be very exuberant and joyful? Then there's a specific set of imagery that can go along with that. If you want it to be more very professional and career focused, then that's going to dictate another set of imagery and another style. So that's where you start, letting your mind go and coming up with those ideas. And this is going to evolve over the course of the month. Your idea will change, and that's fine. Actually, in fact, I allow for that in the grading too, because when you do a section of the mood board, you'll turn it into me. I'll make comments directly on the document, and I'll give it back to you along with the grade. If you make changes that kind of correct any of the concerns or any issues that I see, I'll reevaluate, and you can earn back up to 10 points on that first grade. So that's a way, in my mind, a way of allowing you to kind of learn from that feedback instead of taking it as a one-time assessment and then moving on down the road. Are there any questions so far? Is this all kind of making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that for my color scheme, I really wanted it to be like black and white, but have like an accent color. Is that okay, or do you have to pick like colors?
No, that's actually that's okay. We'll get into color next week, and in fact, that's called an accented achromatic color palette,
Okay.
where it's no colors, but then you have a splash of color to add emphasis and so forth. So, yep, that's a perfectly viable option.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. And this is getting a little bit ahead, but if you look at the colors that this student had in her mood board, remember I said these are the brand colors. So when then looking at her final design, the only place she's really used those colors is in the elements that are specifically related to branding, things like titles or logos. So the entire, you're going to have the natural color of the image you use. Then you want to keep that consistent color palette to represent your personal brand. So I say that just so you know you're not limited to only those colors in your entire design, unless that's the creative direction you want to go. Okay, very good question though, thank you. So we're going to start exploring the different elements that go into the aesthetics of a design and the kind of the emotion of a design by looking at visual story. I think in New Media Tools, you started looking at elements of storytelling towards the end of the course. Now we're going to pick that back up and really take it in a direction specifically oriented towards imagery, how you tell a story through images. When you look at a compelling photograph, you might start to imagine events taking place there, but there isn't really a story being told necessarily until you add something to it to incorporate that story, to start building a specific story. This example is a photograph of some natural caverns, which would be a pretty stunning image to begin with, because these kind of the grandeur of all these natural formations. And then we throw in this one little phrase, "Here I come, ready or not," which is pretty well recognized as being a game of hide and seek. So now there's an event taking place. There's a story problem or a plot line. We are inside this cave from our point of view, and somebody outside is coming to find us in this game of hide and seek. So very simple visual story, and all it took was adding 6 words. And that visual story really captures the spirit of National Geographic for Kids. It's this very natural scene from natural history combined with something very childlike with the game. Have you guys had a chance to look at the Linda lesson yet that has that deals with the visual storytelling? It's about like a half hour long, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Parts of it.
What's that? Parts of it?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall what the 2 elements, the required elements that make a story are that she describes?
Connection. Was that one?
That is an important part of it. The 2 fundamental elements are first a protagonist. So you need somebody to be the actor, the main character in the story. and you need a challenge or a story problem. And through these two elements is really where that connection and engagement comes from. A photograph by itself might be interesting to look at, but it doesn't create as compelling a story as you might have if it has that deeper meaning. Who's our protagonist in this case?
The guy with the snowblower.
Would it be the guy with the snowblower, or would he be the antagonist?
Oh, yes, sorry. I got them flipped around in my head.
No problem. Yeah, this is kind of almost like a horror movie from the standpoint of the snowman. He's hiding behind a tree, and there's this snow thrower coming at him. So rather than taking the straightforward approach of showing this piece of equipment with a price, they've made it more meaningful. I mean, given it humor and and a bit of a narrative. And let's go to this one. In that last case, you had a very clear protagonist and antagonist and a storyline. Taking a look at this one, who in this case would be the protagonist?
The parents?
That's true, but where are the parents?
I am the parent.
You are the parent. Yes, you are the protagonist. And sometimes that can be one of the more effective strategies, is to throw the viewer into this scenario. It's the same thing we saw with the hide and seek game. And that's that engagement you were talking about. Here, oops, I'm going the wrong direction. There we go. Here, we're looking at the protagonist. What's going on with my slides? Okay. And then in this case, we are in the situation looking in. And what's the story problem?
She's coloring all over the walls.
Correct. And beyond that, it's the little message says, decide if your child deserves them. So this is actually an ad for some chocolate treats. And so it's the dilemma of, do you reward this child for recreating this amazing work of art, or do you punish them for defacing your walls? I was using this opportunity to really quickly touch on the rule of thirds. You'll get into this more in graphic design, but it is a rule of mainly of photography that is for composing your shots. A lot of times you'll notice that the main focus of attention, in this case the little girl, is offset from center, either to the left or to the right by about a third of the page, or to the top and bottom. And this is considered to be a way of making for more interesting compositions than having her right dead center like a portrait. A lot of times that's the only explanation you'll get, is it just makes for a more interesting looking design, but it also allows you to show context. So now you see how she's interacting with her environment. Sometimes if the subject was moving across the page, you would want to give them space to move into. So if there was, say, a runner moving from left to right, give them space to the right so that it looks like they have somewhere to go. Otherwise, it looks like it kind of gives the mental impression that they're running into a wall. Also, if you're filming or shooting an interview and someone's speaking towards a listener, towards an interviewer or an interviewee, give them that space to talk into. Hit them over to that left or right third. And it allows you to give that context with their environment, a connection to the environment. It's really geared towards the viewer because it makes it more intuitive for us. It's what we would expect to see, instead of having it very cramped or blocked with the edge of the image. Same thing in this case, where the snowman is offset. So now we can see, and in fact, both of these elements are at the third lines. So we're seeing that engagement, because that was the keyword that you used earlier, was engagement. And we'll see that as we go along, there's different ways that that Linda lesson recommends to build that engagement in. There's the idea of mental challenge, like we have here. You're posed with a hypothetical scenario or a hypothetical question that gets you thinking. You are faced with a humorous scenario. Humor is a really big part of engaging your audience. We see that with the little bald cat. The little puppy, though, look at that face. That is really kind of tugging at your heartstrings, right? And even that tagline. He may be small, but you should see his heart. Do you notice anything about the features of these two animals that that seems maybe might not be obvious at first, but might seem unusual after you kind of consider it for a moment?
They're very humanized with their emotions.
Correct. Yep. Have you watched my lectures before? Hitting these. But yeah, in both cases, and I can guarantee you with this little dog, it's not as obvious, but that picture's probably been photoshopped a bit to bring out some of those more human features. Make his eyes look more human. Make that little lower lip a little more pouty, because we are naturally empathic creatures by nature. That's our nature as human beings. We see emotion expressed in those around us, and we actually reflect it back. There's actual brain structures called mirror neurons that do that. You can see it. Neuroscientists have imaged that. When we witness an emotion, we see those areas triggered in our own brains. So see this used really often in media design, whether it's a dramatic film or an advertisement. It doesn't have to be cute little animals or weird-looking bald cats. Human imagery of human expressions works really well. It can even be a cartoon expression. It doesn't matter to our unconscious brains. We're still going to respond. So using that sense of empathy is a really strong way of getting your audience engaged and pulling them in, making that story matter to them. Even this face, that mouth, the look of shock and terror as the snow thrower approaches. We are just wired to notice those faces and put emotion where there might not really be emotion, like with the snowman, or looking at an electric socket that looks like it's angry, like in a little angry face. Now, looking at the slides coming up, I actually have gotten a little bit ahead of myself. But are there any questions so far? Any thoughts that you wanted to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. So, ways of engaging the audience. And I mentioned a few of these. The intellectual challenge, posing a hypothetical scenario or question, and a rhetorical question that doesn't necessarily have to be answered, but will still get them thinking. Surprise, humor, poignancy, with which we saw with the little brave puppy. Suspense, which is leaving the audience wondering what happens next. It's kind of posing a cliffhanger of some kind. And then symbolism and visual metaphor really kind of go hand in hand. Here's our example of surprise, where there's that initial close-up of the teeth, which could be very intimidating until you see it from far away. And it's the tiny little fuzzy dog. And the interaction of the words and the imagery is what makes this a story. Gives it a deeper meaning than what we might create in our own minds. Danger is just a matter of distance, and that's a collision avoidance system in the VWs, essentially using that little dog that might look scary up close as a metaphor for the risk of running into, having an accident in your car. It's not as scary when you keep your distance. And take a look at this example. Tell me what you see.
I see kids behind the sweater.
Yeah, you see those little eyes peering out.
Yeah.
It's not immediately obvious, but then you realize that there are little faces back there. What message do you take from that? Or rather, what was your initial reaction to seeing that?
Well, I wasn't sure, honestly, at first until I read the text in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
At first, it kind of actually seemed like it was some sort of hide and seek game or something, but I think with the text in the corner, it seems more like it's trying to bring awareness to things like sweatshops.
Yeah, child labor, right? It's
Yeah.
the little print says, "Find out what's behind the clothes you buy." So yeah, and you actually, it brings up a good point, because you could have gone in a completely different direction with using this exact same image, but it took it into a message that's much more uncomfortable and frightening. So really, it is that interaction of your words and your images that give meaning and create and convey the emotion that you are seeking to communicate within your media design. This one, I think, incorporates a number of those different engagement strategies. It certainly has an aspect of surprise, because the first thing you might see is that tagline, "I wish my son had cancer." And it is a surprise, because why would anybody say that ever? But it's also a mental challenge that it immediately doesn't quite make sense to you. So you need answers, and that's the strategy that they've used in this case. Here, they've actually literally told a story. It's not just a visual story. They have typed it out for you. What it comes down to is the child has a very rare condition that has not been researched. If he had cancer instead, there would be a treatment. There has been research and some knowledge. But they've used that very startling and attention-grabbing message, as well as the imagery, which is very emotional as well, to really hook the viewer and pull them in. typically in my go-tos, just as a aside, I like to use the examples that you guys use from your exploration, but because the dates on week 1 here are pushed back a little bit from what's normal, I don't have, I'm not able to grab your specific examples, but in the coming weeks you'll see that. I like to talk about the ones that you guys have found interesting. And the last of those engagement strategies I really wanted to deal with is symbolism and visual metaphor, which I really see as aspects of the same idea. It's just the idea of something, of an image that embodies a greater idea and expresses some much more poignant or meaningful concept, which is essentially the definition of what a symbol is. One point that I want to reiterate is that not every image is a visual story, and not every visual metaphor is a visual story. If you don't have that protagonist and don't have a story problem, then you don't have a story. You just have an image, a piece of art, perhaps. This piece is a visual metaphor, farm to table. It's a piece of silverware that ends in a farming pitchfork, but there isn't really a story. We can infer that there's more going on. Somehow the food is getting from the farm to the table, but we don't have that. So always look for that protagonist. So that'll be your first indication of that you're dealing with a visual story. Visual stories aren't always called for in every case. Sometimes just pure information might be what's needed in that case. But as we've seen, they have those emotional engagement opportunities that give them an advantage. This is one that I've often seen selected for the exploration, and it's a pretty striking visual metaphor. But the meaning isn't immediately obvious. I've seen a lot of different interpretations. So what you have is an ad for corrective fluid, like whiteout. And their slogan is right the wrong. What is the kind of most universal representation of wrong or evil is the devil, right? And so here we have the angel kind of casting out or exorcising the devil, with the white angel being a representation of the white corrective fluid, and the devil in black as the black ink. So it's correcting that wrong. It's a very complex visual metaphor for a very simple idea. And here's one that I'll throw to you guys. What describe the visual metaphor that is shown here?
The flag represents the Moroccan government covering up the torture that's going on. I mean, kind of as the text says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the text kind of gives the matter-of-fact statement, and then we have this kind of a more artistic representation of that, right? Because what's more iconic in representing a nation than the flag itself, that really encapsulates all that makes up that country. So having it literally covering up that case of torture creates a much more powerful statement. Are there any thoughts or questions specifically about visual storytelling? in general, or any other particular strategies that we looked at?
I don't think so.
Okay, so what you'll do in your exploration this week is look at the welovead.com website, and they have a massive archive of advertisement designs. Browse through there and find a single ad design that has a really good visual story. Again, not all of them will have a visual story. Look for a protagonist and a story problem, and then describe that in your post. Following up on that, you're going to do your Photoshop practice, and you're going to create your own visual stories using a couple of images. And I've provided a bunch of images that would work for this exercise. If you really want to use some of your own photographs, you can. I'm not really picky about that, but the idea is to create visual stories with a distinct protagonist and story problem using some of those engagement strategies, while in effect learning how to use Photoshop. And then that will inform some of your work as you move into your own, designing your own visual mission statement design. And let's see, that is really the extent of what I had prepared tonight. Something I should have mentioned in the beginning of class, but I'll mention now, is just a reminder that next week is summer break, and there are no assignments due that week. You have the 4th of July holiday, and then you have our week off for summer. And I'm going to look at that. I think and I'm not sure if I did it yet, but I'm going to push the first mood board project to the end of that period, so you don't have to worry about it this weekend. But also don't forget about it. But hope you have a good, relaxing break while you're away. All right. Any last thoughts or questions before we wrap up?
No, ma'am.
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Then I'm happy to let you go and get back to your evening. I appreciate you guys joining me tonight.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Okay. Well, have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Good night.